trying and talking here. I'm Ann Clutterbuck, the chair of our 11-member committee, and I'd like for us to just go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Hi, everyone. My name's Henry Goodrow. Been at the church now since about 1997. Just a member of the call committee. I'm also a member of the technology committee that he's leading. And we've raised 2 children here through the church, and been excited to be part of this process. Thank you.
I'm Emily Weinstedt, and I've been at the church my whole life. And I'm a 10th grader at Heights High School.
Terry Fuller, I'm ex officio on the committee. I become your council president.
Great timing.
Nathan Weicker, alternate on the call committee.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm Ann Clutterbuck. I've been a member of this church for a little more than 10 years, and came to this church became a member after attending for about 5 years, and was brought into the church by our former senior pastor and good friend Robert Moore, who I would meet out in the village, different places out about as somebody reminded me he was known as the Pope of the village, something like that. And so I'm one of the people he lured into this beautiful place. And I love coming here because of the music and because of the message, and I feel closer to God as a result of my time here in this beautiful place with you all. So it's a real privilege to serve on and a daunting one to serve on the call committee. We have several other members of the call committee. I'll do my best to go through the list. We've got Quentin Adams, Victoria Allen, Jill Baylor, Kathy Collins, Alicia Salas.
Andrea.
Sorry, Andrea. That's why I couldn't come up with the last name. Andrea Salas, and Mandy Durr is an ex officio member as well of the committee. And we have
Yeah,
sorry, and Henry and Emily and Nathan. Did I miss anybody? Did I call anybody by the wrong name again? Yeah, and yeah, Mandy's ex officio. We've been meeting regularly since June, and when I mean regularly, I mean pretty much every week throughout the summer. And my hat is off to this amazing group of volunteers who are treating the work with seriousness and a sense of urgency, as well as a sense of patience. And we're waiting on God to send us somebody who will be a perfect person for this congregation. The process is outlined by the Synod, so we follow the Synod rules, and the process included creating our ministry site profile, which is what we spent much of the summer working on throughout the summer. And our ministry site profile is like a job description of sorts for ministers, interested ministers, to look at our ministry site profile and see if that sounds like the kind of place for them. We sent that in, we finalized it, it was approved by council, we sent it into the Synod, and we are ready now to receive candidates once we, and more importantly, they are ready to send them to us once we complete our mock interview process, which is a pretty exciting place for us to be right now. We had our first mock interview last Monday, and first round interviews are always going to be on Zoom. They're always going to be remote, and so that's good for those of us who are Zoom flexible. And then the second round of interviews is in person. And we need to go through an in-person mock interview, which we will with the same rostered minister that we conducted the mock Zoom interview with. And that is going to happen on the 28th of November. Then we will be ready and prepared to receive the names that the synod sends to us, and we hope to begin conducting that first round of interviews with that first round of candidates in early January. So we'll be preparing for those interviews throughout December, and then early January, ready to conduct the actual Zoom interviews. The purpose of our Sunday forums is really for you to get to know us and to get to know the process. We will not be having a Sunday forum in December, but we will resume in January. In January, it will also be very much a summary and then receiving your feedback. That's really the main purpose for this forum, is for us to receive your input and your feedback. And once we do get into the place and position of interviewing candidates, I'm sure you can understand we won't be able to reveal who the candidates are or where they're from or any of those kinds of identifying features for their protection as well as for the congregation. So that's my summary. I don't know if any of my colleagues on the call committee have anything to add. Any observations or thoughts?
I think that, we learned a lot on the first virtual interview about ourselves. Or you want me to come up?
Well, or loud,
Yeah.
like, yeah, Nathan, if you, yeah.
So we learned a lot about ourselves, how we came across in the MSP. And also about, what we like, what we don't like about the candidates. So, or what we're interested in going forward. So I think we came out of the mock interview really energized about, how we can present ourselves, what we can be prepared to answer the tough questions, but also a little bit more about, okay, these are the things that, were good. These are the things that weren't so good. And it was a really good process. So it was insightful on both sides.
It was really interesting too, because the rostered minister that we participated with is she's not from around here. She's from Minnesota and then Seattle, and she was assigned to us by the synod, and it was really I think a very smart choice on their part to send us somebody who is not from here and doesn't know thing one about us. And so getting her feedback on how we came across in writing was very instructive. We will probably tweak a few words of the MSP, and but we aren't changing the any of the substance. But there were a few words that she interpreted as meaning certain things when we did not. When we had certainly a different intention.
I'd be interested in what comes across as attractive about this congregation and what comes across as not attractive.
Yes, and we, I love that question, Uta, and I think that's a good question for us to ask specifically in our follow-up interview with her. The beauty of these mock interviews with a candidate who is not interested in the position is that we can really ask her things to help us improve, right? Rather than in the second round or the initial mock interview of a candidate, an actual candidate, we're going to be more seeking to know them. She touched on a few things. I think that in the end, it's fair to say she was pleased to know that we were active in the community, the immediate community around us, but that did not come across in the MSP. And so we're changing a few words in that to, we assume everybody knows that about us, right? And we thought we were presenting that accurately in the MSP, but that's an example of the kind of things that we're going to be kind of tweaking or highlighting. I would say it's fair to say she came from a more, a less formal form of worship. And so for her, our more formal or traditional style of worship was something she was, kind of pushed back on, or wasn't sure what that meant. And so for her, that would not have been an attractive aspect, but for us, of course, we think it is. And so that would be a defining thing for candidates. Am I gonna describe that right?
Yeah, that's right. So just the other perception that we
You're so tall, you can sit
okay.
or move a little further away.
I guess the other perception that I heard from her is that a lot of the language we used, especially when we were at West Campus, was that we were helping them, right? And the language she introduced us to, and I think was kind of interesting for us to learn, is what gifts are we receiving from the community? What gifts are we receiving from those that we interact with in our Latin X ministry and other ministries? So it was helpful for us to hear, at least for me, to hear that and go, oh, okay, we do sound a little bit like we're saving others. And what are we doing to receive those gifts?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And it was, gosh, such a fascinating experience for me, because it reminded me a bit of that exercise. Did y'all ever see that exercise a few years ago on the internet that was coming around? And is this dress black or is it blue? Or is it blue or is it yellow? Yes. And people had very definitive ideas about what they were actually seeing. And their spouse or their neighbor had the exact opposite, and some fights might have been had over it. But it's kind of like that, not fighting, but that we're now going to be taking that information and understanding how people read our words, and our words are important, and we're looking forward to receiving the candidates.
I've got a question. Do we have a general idea of the first round? How many we'll be talking about as far as presented from the Senate?
We do not know yet how many. And thank you for asking that question, because you'll recall from the previous call committee, they interviewed 6 at a batch, 6 at a time. And they only had 1 round, and those fell out. But the Synod waited until they had a batch to send them. This time, they are not waiting. They're going to send them to us as they receive them. So that is an important point, that if you know of people who might be a good fit for us, continue to submit their names to the call committee. I ran into somebody last week who was asking me about that and promising to send somebody, but still we've received some names from the congregation, but not many. I think that Tracy Brashear Schultz said that she has more than 1 to send us. She refers to them as candidates, whether it's 2 candidates or 3. I don't think it's more than 3 for this first round, but she is recovering from some surgery, and we'll have a little more clarity and be able to share information with her next week.
Just a slight addition to what you said there. The last, and this is the folks that submitted to prior to the pandemic. One of the things that was a little bit more limiting in the previous approaches, they would send us a slate of candidates, 3 or 6 candidates. The congregation then would need to consider all 3 of those candidates and then return the entire batch back to the Synod. And only after we did that, we would get a new batch of candidates. And we couldn't actually go back if we saw a candidate that we released that previous batch, or that previous slate, and wanted to go back to them. That was actually not possible. So you considered that batch, you released that batch, and you went on to the next. And now with these new guidelines, it's a little bit more flexible. That being said, there are a lot of congregations searching for pastors right now, and so the pastors also have a little bit more flexibility.
What is the process that you use for names that you get suggested to, as opposed to ones that are identified by the Senate?
Thank you. Yes, so we have the Synod has a form to fill out, And we either fill it out on the person's behalf, the person who calls, and we've done that before, or we have the, say, if you had somebody, you would fill this form out. The form is one page, it's pretty simple. It's what's the name and congregation of, and any contact information you have for the candidate. How do you know the candidate? Those kind of things. And it's, you know, why do you suggest this candidate? Some of those can like blank on the form. And then after that, we receive the form, we forward that on to the Synod to Tracy, and she processes it.
Does she then contact them and say, please read the MSP and are you interested?
Yeah, so what she does, she then reaches out to their bishop. Just like we would want somebody to reach out to our bishop if they were wanting to hire. Well, Carol. So she does that kind of behind the scenes work, and she says it's actually very collaborative, and that it's not an antagonistic process or anything like that. And once that notification has been made, an outreach is made to the candidate to see if they're even looking, see if they're interested in moving. And if they are, then we send them the MS, or the Synod sends them the MSP.
If someone is nominated that's within this Synod, is there any bias toward or against that nomination?
You know, I would say, no, there's no bias against it. And in fact, Tracy has been very clear about that there's that the Holy Spirit moves in amazing ways, and she's not going to stand in the way of it. We have three more call committee members, Kathy Collins and Jill Baylor have joined us. Thank you for coming. And anything anybody wants to add to that answer to Paul's question about feedback we've been receiving? A lot of the conversations we've been having that have been had with Tracy are one-on-one between me and Tracy, or Kathy and Tracy. Kathy is our committee secretary, and I happen to facilitate payments and things like that, different things. So, but Tracy is a wonderful person to work with on this, and is, as you can imagine, very collaborative. We still don't know of the many names that have been submitted from this congregation or from elsewhere, which ones she's going to be sending us, and we'll have more insight into that later.
But you all know that it's one of the candidates you're presented with, that it might have been someone that was suggested. I mean, do you know, does everyone know if it was someone who was suggested by a congregant member?
I know, and I think some of the committee members through whom that has come knows, but we haven't yet decided if we're going to share, if we're going to want to know that as a group. You know, we don't want to necessarily have it taint our approach. We haven't honestly talked about it yet as a group.
We do want to limit bias, right? I mean, we want to come at this, you know, with an open mind that, you know, we will look at all candidates with what they bring and the questions that we bring to them. Obviously, if we know the person, that affects that, right? But that's the tack that we'd like to take. And we're viewing this. I mean, a lot of us come from the corporate world where, you know, we were given very strict guidelines to limit bias, and we're trying to incorporate those where they make sense.
Yeah, it really has been a great committee to work with, because the council appointed a good broad committee with Nathan and Henry and Quentin and I have all worked on search committees before for our employers or other kinds of things, and to be able to use those best practices has been helpful.
Okay, obviously, this is the first search committee since the pandemic, and now that every church has their services online. How will that be utilized in terms of culling people out that may apply very early in the process? I mean, what do y'all anticipate on using this?
Yeah, we will definitely be using it. And I think some people will probably do, on the committee will do a deeper dive than others and then bring that information to us as a group. So we'll start receiving, we think that we will receive some names after our final mock interview on the 28th. Say around December 1st or so, we might start receiving some names. We as a committee would review those names and then over the holidays be doing that kind of research, right? Not just reading their rostered minister profile or their MP, but to look at exactly what you're talking about, seeing what they're written, if they've written and published anything that's available online, if they any of their sermons. We've some of us have already started doing this with for example, with our mock interview participants, and with other names that haven't been submitted, but you know, people have said, oh, we ought to take a look at so and so. It's really a wonderful place and time to be able to be looking at candidates since everything is out there.
I just want to point out, it obviously goes both ways, right? So we are all over the place online, and so they can clearly check out how we worship and how we do other things, right?
Yes,
Including these meetings.
including
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
Are these recordings available to you?
well, they're not just,
Yes, they are.
are they now just right there? Okay. On
They're
YouTube, okay,
they're on the website.
on our website.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but anybody can go to our website and get to these meetings.
I don't know. I don't
Yes,
I just record them, yes, okay.
And they can and they do and I have. Why the technical stuff is so important.
Just-
The recording.
just push.
Well, what would you all like to hear from these meetings as we go forward? As we
We'll have our next one in January. We won't have one in December. Is that correct?
that's correct, yeah.
Maybe we'll know more.
Oh,
Whenever there have been interviews and a candidate has decided to withdraw their candidacy, it would be real interesting to get a frank evaluation from them, why, and have that passed on frankly,
yes,
because it's not just the committee picking and choosing, it's the congregation calling.
yes. Great point. Do we have is there a question online?
No, anyone at home?
Did you mention that in our first mock interview, she was nice enough to give us some suggestions about what we did?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And it was very helpful, wasn't it?
Yes.
And actually, we then, after she got off the interview, we had a meeting online and with Zoom. The 9 of us, as an aside, our ex officio members are not going to participate in the interview process. And that's per the Synod guidelines as well. And but this is the first time we've seen each other since in person, since as a group, since that interview. And I felt like I learned so much, Jill, and we got a lot of really good feedback that is going to help kind of tweak our approach. And, you know, some of the feedback like that she gave us about our comments around the West Campus and other things are very similar to the kind of feedback that the prior call committee received about the congregation and so welcome. Andrea Salas is also on our committee and, you know, but the feedback was that we tend to come off as too much like, you know, here we are, nice to you, what do you say today? Or something like that. And that's of course not how we are or how we want to come across. So looking for welcome feedback on how to change that perspective. And we'll get some more from her. As we go forward.
I blame our pastors for that because they always tell us how great we are.
Yeah.
How does the Senate get the names?
How does the Synod get the names? They are constantly, she's proactive and they're constantly looking at the, there's a Synod, there's a denomination-wide database, which she's constantly looking at. She looks at it weekly to see if there have been any updates. She's got 12 different calls in this Synod that she's helping. 12. And you know, they're not all large like us. They're not all set in an urban setting. They're not all with kind of a high church music aspect.
12 is not an unusual number at all. It takes about a year to fill a call, and there's 120 congregations more or less in our synod, and the average tenure is about 10 years. So 12 is right where it ought to be.
You mentioned the denomination-wide people up for call. What about the affiliate non-Lutheran?
Yes, yes, thank you. And Tracy has reached out to the other bishops, the Episcopal diocese and others to let them know that we are seeking people. So,
And the advertisement in Christian Century will also address a much wider pool.
yes, yeah.
When is
And-
that
and-
gonna run?
When is
When is the ad gonna run or has to run?
it's going to run in January. And we're still trying to make sure that it's not just in the print form. There's some way on the Christian Century website to be able to see and find job placements, but it's not readily apparent to like a lot of the other stuff is. Andy, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Pop in.
Yeah, that we did. Well, as I mentioned at the opening, the purpose of these meetings is really to keep you apprised of where we are in the process, to keep open lines of communication and to so that the entire congregation, if they're interested, is clear on where we are with things. And we want to hear your feedback, so if there are any aspects.
How aside from just verbally can the congregation provide feedback?
Thank you, Henry. Yes, we've got.
Good plan.
We've got, we have a webpage. How many people have seen our webpage on the Christ the King website? There's excellent, thank you. And you can tell people who haven't yet, Rachel has put a button up at the top of, you know, an actual tab that you can click on and it takes you right to the webpage with frequently asked questions or where we are in the process. And in that webpage, there is a direct link to an anonymous call committee webpage if you want to do that. You can also, and that would send an email to me. We have received a few emails from that, probably actually 2. I've received 3, but one was a spam offering to clean my house. And I thought, well, how do they know? So, some of it, and then we can also, that we have a mailbox upstairs on the 3rd floor. We have not had any mail in that yet either, and we also have a comment box. Thank you for the
Yeah, in the narthex,
positive
right?
comments.
Right.
People have said, you know, Keep it up, keep up the good work, or hang in there. Those are nice too.
So if I recall correctly, in the last meeting, there was some. Commentary about chanting that provoked a little more discussion among some of us.
Yes, I'm admiring the fabulous whistler who's up there. And speaking of our musical congregation. Yeah, so there were comments or questions about chanting because we had been discussing that issue with Tracy Brashear-Schultz. And just as a bit of background, she met with us after we completed our NSP. And she met with us for 2 hours and, really there was a very robust back and forth and an exchange. As she was trying to understand our congregation better. Of course, she's been here to worship with us and to lead us, but sussing out the different things within it. And one of the things we mentioned at the last meeting was that chanting is important to this congregation. It is not going to be the only differentiating factor, right? Where we want a lot of things in our ideal candidate. But primarily we want somebody who can work well in a group. I've written it out if I may read this. Somebody, and it is in order, bring joy and good humor to relationships. Build a sense of community. Someone who's relational. And extroverted and at ease with building relationships. That doesn't mean we'll only hire an extrovert. No, we'll hire somebody who has these gifts. And high liturgical experience is important to this congregation. And another example, PhD is not required, but they must have some snap and they better bring their intellectual chops to this congregation. We'd like somebody who can speak Spanish and German. And, so so what's most important about it is that Tracy, as she's looking for candidates, she really took to heart the whole person that we're looking for and has a better understanding of the way that our congregation experiences worship. We have, 3 very different styles of worship at this, in this congregation, with the Taizé style contemplative service on Saturday, with the more contemporary early service. Brief is probably not the right word. Say that again. Brief order. And,
Yes.
we have an abbreviated version of the Lord's Prayer that I'm still learning, and which we close our meetings with, and then we have the more traditional church, the high church kind of Lutheran traditional experience, and we don't mean that word to be off-putting, by the way, the word traditional, but we mean it to more accurately describe how we experience the liturgy at the 11 o'clock service.
In your list of highly desired attributes, I didn't hear anything about good preaching.
So, and of course, good preaching is important, and if the person's a dud and we see it online, they won't get invited back.
And
Right.
that is part of our 5 mutual expectations. From our side and from the candidate side in the first year. So we've listed out, preaching specifically as one of those 5 first year expectations. So there's different places to capture different things, right? And that's where we captured that.
Yes, and you can see the MSP online on the website also.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You talk about preaching, but you see a lot of different, some preachers are just very theological. And they don't come to any points that you take home with you to ponder. And some preachers are very good about taking the Bible and applying it to everyday life, and it touches something with you. And you go home pondering these concepts. And to me, that's a big, just theological, it's not nearly as meaningful to me as a more emotional. However you would define that.
And Phil, that's something we'll absolutely get into in the interviews, right? Not necessarily the first interview, the second interview where we're able to dive deep. We want to hear about their preaching style specifically. How do they build it? And some of that is in their RMP, their roster minister profile. I mean, I read that with the one we use. So we definitely understand that. We'll include that in the deep dive interviews.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking a lot about their style of preaching, right? One of the things that came out, for example, in the mock interview is this rostered minister who's participating with us. She has a theatrical background. And she said that she, for example, gave a sermon once where she, from the perspective of the mother of the prodigal son. And so we'll get a real feel for it, but that kind of feedback, Phil, is very important, and we want to hear from everybody what you like or don't like about ministers.
Okay, I can acquire, but there's an hilarious book, and since we're coming on a long weekend where people might have time to read something to lighten the process, it's called The Search. And it's about a crazy. Some of you have read it. I recommended it to the call committee. It is an hilarious, come out this year, account by a Unitarian Universalist church in California that can't decide between a lapsed Episcopalian or a Wiccan. And very thing involved other sorts of meditative devices. Anyway, it's called The Search. It's hilarious, and I actually recommend it to our congregation by the way at reflecting on ourselves, right, as humans, and the human aspect that we are, maybe in not quite such an absurd way, but in our own absurd way, bringing to the process. So that.
And if you're into cooking, at the end of it, it's full of recipes.
Yeah. The call committee had a public aspect.
Of course.
Yeah. Half our crowd is leaving to go sing in the choir. Thank you. Yeah. But Philip, that's the exact kind of thing that we like hearing as we trying to determine what would work best in this congregation.
Will you have access then, or be able to request access to sampling prior sermons, for instance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we will have access to their prior sermons. We will ask for them, and if they're not available online. And the answer will be telling as well, right? All of this is part of the process. And, just like with us and how we use our words or what we intend to convey, they will be doing the same thing, and we'll be learning from each other. Jill.
I've spoken, a couple of people have spoken to me, and the first thing out of their mouth was preaching and teaching, and then building community. And so there we are.
Yeah, and this MSP was such a really wonderful exercise because you've got kind of the job description, which is the preaching and teaching, and then you've got the gifts. And that at first, when we were going through it, I was really struggling with why they asked it a certain way, and why don't they ask immediately about, or why don't we lead immediately with our belief in Jesus Christ and the way we worship, and the way the Holy Spirit plays a role in our congregation, those kind of things. But the way that they ask the questions and the way they drive the process among the call committee members to be thinking through what the gifts are, a gift a person brings, and make it limited. We can only pick 5. So we decided there were other ways to amplify the importance of all these other aspects.
Thank you for doing that. Wow.
Yeah.
Just-
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for, if there any,
So much.
maybe if you have something you
I
want
just
to
want to tell you that one issue that could have been an issue that won't be is the congregation stewardship. Because you have done extremely well and we're not done yet. But the last numbers I saw on Friday were $605,000 pledge. And that's really, I would say, 3/4 of the way where we got to get to. So that's amazing. And Cheryl said, I hope you're happy. She said, this has never happened in 3 weeks. And so you know what's next is that we'll give it another week or two. And then the people who have given before and have not pledged will get another communication from.
Invitation.
Saying, you know, it's like, we have ways that they used to say. Not dealing with this. But congratulations, that's what you did. And so, you know, and I think looking in this room, you all did that. So you all did that. I didn't say y'all.
Oh, yeah.
One other thing on preaching, I know that in way past calls and like that, they have the candidates, you know, visit here and some of them would take a turn in the pulpit. And I remember, you know, of course we had Peterman style, who was, you know, he was up there in the pulpit and very focused and presentation. And one of the candidates, he said, I can't do that. And he was out of the pulpit. He wasn't going to be constrained by that. He was extemporaneous and waving his arms. And so, you know, even from our side, we need to consider a little bit, you know, about the style of preaching that we feel comfortable with. You know, is that much of a change in style going to be a problem for the community here?
Mandy, can you share with us the process after, when we have a candidate?
So, yeah. I should walk up.
Yeah, come a little closer. Yeah.
Back. So what will happen is that the call committee will pick a candidate. And we'll present that candidate as their candidate.
Not so close.
Not this close.
No, because we want your head in there. Yeah, there you go. Okay, perfect.
We'll present the candidate to the council. And the council has 2 jobs to do. One is to agree with the call committee that this is the candidate. And so that when that candidate comes to us, it will be the bishops behind this candidate, the call committees behind this candidate, the councils behind this candidate. They're all, at that point, they're supporting the candidate. That's the first job the council has. Second job the council has, which will take a little more work, is that the council has to actually work out the compensation package. There are all kinds of issues with that have to be carefully dealt through. And when that's done, then 2 weeks before, you will get a letter from the council saying, we have a candidate, or from the call committee, or from both. We have a candidate, the candidate's gonna be here on the weekend, I'm making this up, okay? On the weekend of January 1st. And we're going to have.
What's here?
Talk to my wife. You will have a hopefully, I can see this weekend in my head anyways, you know, some kind of gathering with the council with that candidate, maybe on Friday night. And Saturday sometime during, or Saturday morning, sometime later on in the day, some kind of gathering with the informal gathering with the congregation. Not as big as the festival, so don't worry.
Oh.
And then the next day, and this is where the fun starts, that candidate should preach and preside at 8:30 and 11. And then we just have to figure out how everybody gets a chance to vote for that candidate on that day. So and in that congregational meeting, so preach, preside, and in that congregational meeting, you get to ask questions
Of the candidate?
of the candidate.
Okay.
And then at the end of that, and I'm sure there'll be someone from the Synod here to run that meeting. Because it's their meeting. Then at the end of that, the candidate's dismissed, you vote. And hopefully at the end of that, you have more than a 2/3 vote so that you can call the candidate back in and say, you're a new pastor. That's the way that we can, in my mind, goes. You know, I mean, the informal stuff doesn't always happen, but I think it should, especially here where there's so much that happens informally. I think it's really would be useful. So you might want to kill the person, but in the process, doing the adult form is not doing the form rather, is not a bad thing either, but might be too much to ask. I know I've done these things and there's a point in life when you say, no more. So that's just too much. So it's a great time. It can be, the whole thing can be one big celebration. Unless you're not happy.
Great, thank you, Andy. Well, seeing there are no further questions, if there are no questions online, then
It's early, so
early.
you know we're going to bless things
It's okay.
outside. I know that you all are cold. I'm feeling great. My church because of the weather. If you don't want to go outside, you don't have to, but you'll be able to hear it inside. But I mean, look what got done this summer. Just think about this for a minute. You all paid for a temporary air conditioning system. You did that. Then, and no one notices it because it's so unobtrusive. You paid for a railing on the walkway that comes up to the main entrance to the church.
That was new.
Yeah. And then you split the cost on redoing all the floors and the painting on the second floor. And then because
Split with crossing borders.
right,
Yeah,
so it was crossing borders, and then because Judith Hungerford never stops when she's on a chair, you also agreed to and paid for cleaning this whole building, which looks spectacular, I think. If you want to see, you can look and find a couple places that aren't clean, which were deliberately left unclean, so you know what you need. And then the big thing was the bell tower, which is safe, clean, painted, not quite done, but it's close enough to do this today. Anyway, why have Christ the King Sunday if you can't bless something? So I mean, you did so much work, and that doesn't count what the technology committee did, which means that you hear better in church now. I mean, a lot has been done, and it's all been done since June. 5 months. It's astounding. I couldn't get this done in 5 years in New York, so, and there's so much else to come though.
So Mandy, is it true that the organ requires the temperature in the church to be really, really cold?
I'm really sorry to say this, but yeah, it is. Yeah, so you put in a first class instrument. It's unmatched in this case. And then you have to pay for wearing coats to church. I'm sorry, it was true in St. Peter's. They're putting the organ back in St. Peter's now, because they had to take it out because there was a flood. And it's the same issue. They had to when I got there, I said, why is the air conditioning blowing on the organ? It's destroying the wooden pipes. So we had to do all that kind of stuff. It's just, organs are really temperamental. If you think the congregation is temperamental, the organ is much more temperamental.
Was it built in Germany? Yeah. Okay, well, so what is the temperature in Germany? You know,
Oh, God. You go to those churches in winter, oh, man.
But the German organist know that. We get German here just to see our organ.
Yeah,
Yes.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have two things that lots of churches would kill for. And that is the organ, which, and I know what the issue is, believe me. And the other one is the bells. it's a rare congregation that has, I mean, some congregations have a bell. I don't know how many are up there, but there are a lot of them and they sound great. So,
Oh,
five,
Are there six? Five, six?
five, six.
Yes.
So listen today and come.
During the worship.
Yeah, three. The one is,
They're worth talking about.
Yeah.
They're worth talking about because that's a sign of public presence. So we use that organ properly in terms of other things that can happen in this space for this community. Sky's the limit. I really believe that, by the way, in case you had caught that. I believe the sky's the limit for this congregation.
A story about the bells. Right after they came in, our secretary at the time, Betty Gibson, got a call from someone in the neighborhood that was complaining about being woken at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday with the bells. And can't you quit ringing them? And the answer was, don't worry, you'll get used to it.
If you haven't been in the bell tower since it's been redone, you need to just poke your head in there. So Ed and I rang this morning before the early service. And we looked at each other and thought, this is actually fun now. It's gorgeous. It's just a gorgeous place. It used to be dreary and rusty and dangerous and horrible. Now it's wonderful.
Well, it's also safe. Because it was,
yes.
all of you who told me it was safe, you're wrong. Those platforms, I've never been in this bell tower until they started this project, and the welder one morning he said, come on, take a look. Well, the platforms had holes in them, which was bad enough. I mean, that's where the water went out. That's a good thing. The bad thing is when the water went out, it also took rust and parts of the thing with it. So, and because people are not lightweight, and when they went up there, the thing bowed in the middle. And why did it bow in the middle? Because there were no supports under it. So if you go in there and look underneath all those platforms, and by the way, for me, the hero of this whole project is this woman right here. Yeah, you were there to watch. You watched them. I think you watched every coat, and you probably did that. In my mind, that's what you did. So great people who took care of this stuff.
We need more bell ringers. So
Yes.
We need bell ringers.
Get stuck in the holes, problem gone.
And they slowed it.
Oh,
So Ben Remert said this morning, we like to store things in there, but how do we store things? I said, couple of wooden pallets will solve the problem, because the water will run off now. It's built to run so that the water doesn't stand. Good news. Bad news. That means the water's got to go somewhere, and it's going to go down, I think, a back wall, or maybe it's the front, I can't remember. But it's going to go on the bottom. And on the bottom is where they store things, so.
But you can cover with tarps.
And you have to put pallets down, so it's not sitting in the water too. This is not rocket science. It's really easy. But I'm really happy because getting all that stuff done in 1 year is astounding. All we have to do now is take care of it.
Yeah.
Coming.
How are we doing on the deferred maintenance over at the West Campus?
So that's a great question, and here's the answer. There's not much deferred maintenance at the moment, and this is why. That's the committee, and you'll hear from them in 2 weeks, decided that we were going to put energy and money into 2 buildings of the 6, I think, on the campus. And those 2 buildings are the sanctuary building, which we could do things with, and the education building, which is where the Emmaus folks are, and they put most of the money into that. The other stuff, if it needs fixing, we're gonna fix it. But if it doesn't need fixing, we're not gonna try to improve it until we figure out what we're going to do. Now, how are we gonna figure out what we're gonna do? Part 1 of that project we'll hear about it, a bunch of us will hear about it on the 28th of November. We'll hear that we had a site feasibility study done on the property. Because there are issues that are not related to the building, there are issues that are related to actually the way the entrance and egress, which is, I've experienced it personally, treacherous if you're coming in the wrong direction. So we're in pretty good shape. We've done a lot this summer. air conditioning, surprise, and a couple of doors. Some stuff that had to be done and brought up. So that's done. Now the next step is, what are we gonna do? Now that we did it, what are we gonna do with it? Again, there's a person in the back row, you played a major role in that, so Karen Whitfield. So it's just, I think the place is in pretty good shape over there. And we'll see what happens next. Beth Marie has found some very interesting possibilities that that's her to talk about. But there's some really good possibilities for us there, so.
You'll hear the results of the feasibility study at the December 11th, part 1 annual meeting.
We should talk about that meeting just for a minute, because so electing council members. First presentation of the budget. Presentation that you have to agree to put on the next meeting, the part 2 meeting of the Constitution. Something from the MIST group, that's the
Merger and integration.
merger folks. And then the other report will be from the strategic planning stuff, how all things have sort of come along with it, so. Because remember, the strategic plan goes into effect January 1.
And gifts.
And then by then, if the council approves it, and if they don't, we'll have a conversation. We put together a small committee to work on a gift acceptance policy for the church and the foundation. And we're proposing, and the council has to vote on it at its meeting on the 6th, right? To create 2 endowment funds that are managed by the foundation committee. And those 2 endowment funds are one for operations. So we can endow if we have to, if we need it, when we need it, and with the process, they're creating how we access the money, and a endowment fund for the property. So the congregation, the people who love this church, it's the way I sell this thing. I sold it at St. Peter's. You love this church so much that you pledge $605,000. Then you might want to keep loving this church, even when you have a better congregation with a much closer walk with Jesus. So that's legacy, they were legacy gifts. And we're anxious to have that develop over years. My story is at St. Peter's, when I got there, there was a little less than $1 million in a fund, and it wasn't legacy gifts. It was what they had left over from building the building. Because they got a lot of money from in those days Citibank. When I left, it was 11 million. But it wasn't, it took a long time. And people had to go to their other congregation in many ways, in many times for that to happen. But this congregation would be in, you've got to prepare for the worst, not just the best. So the worst is when a whole bunch of us aren't here anymore. And so.
Some people might say that's the best.
No. I say I'm in trouble.
This is a comment from the call committee, tying into what Mandy said. They get to see our financials.
Yeah.
When they submit their RFP to us, and they read our MSP. So having a strong foundation will attract more candidates to us. So I think this is important to consider how we do giving to the congregation.
And to follow up on that, there was a specific question in the MSP about financials. And one of the questions was, what's the amount of the reserve? And technically we answered 0, because we don't have a designated reserve. We have fund balances, but most of them are in designated funds for specific purposes. So having this gift acceptance policy, should it be approved, will allow us to talk to candidates about how this is an important part of our financial infrastructure in terms of positioning the church going forward For an operating endowment that can act as a reserve, not necessarily as a replacement for. If we forgive.
I gotta go to work. So
Okay.
So,
I'll see some of
So-
you outside.
so yes,
Well,
thank you.
we will wrap the meeting, I guess.
We have to go.
Okay,
So thank you.
Thank you all very
Yeah,
much.
thanks.
See you in January.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.